Here we have the iPhone 16 Pro and the Google Pixel 9 Pro, and we are doing a full-on camera comparison right now. And we are shooting on the front-facing camera, as you can see. We're shooting at 4K 30 frames per second, and you can see here in the background we got some kind of different exposures going on with the shadows and the highlights and stuff. So I'd be curious to know what you think about the video quality down in the comment section. But like I said, we're gonna go over everything. All the photos here are kind of shot in auto mode, just basically what you would get out of the camera if you pull it out of the box and you were shooting it yourself. So leave this video a thumbs up and let's jump into it. Starting out, we're looking at the main cameras here in broad daylight, the best possible conditions, with the iPhone 16 Pro's 48 megapixel fusion sensor and the Pixel 9 Pro's 50 megapixel sensor, which in their default modes spit out 24 megapixel photos and 12 megapixel photos respectively. So here you can see that we definitely have punchier colors coming from the Pixel, especially with that orange there on that little hose. And right here you can see that we definitely have more saturation in the sky as well on the Pixel 9 Pro. There's definitely a color difference between these two, which is going to come down to personal preference in my opinion, but I do think that the Pixel definitely handles the highlights a little better, like under the bridge here, where the dynamic range is just noticeably better on the Pixel 9 Pro. And then we have shots like this where there's really not much of a noticeable difference between the two in my opinion. The shot of under this bridge right here, the iPhone definitely has a lot more contrast to it than the Pixel does, and that's kind of a common theme in a lot of these daylight photos. You can see the contrast difference between the two is 100% there. I noticed that the iPhone definitely had more true to life colors, especially when it came to skin tones, but I really can't help but notice that the iPhone just falls flat on containing the highlights in this shot here, especially on that woman's jeans. There's a lot of good happening between both of these smartphones, but I think that if you like an overall more contrasted look in your photos out of the box, the iPhone is definitely the way to go. And like I said, I think the iPhone had more true to life colors, but there are some shots here where it really doesn't look like there's anything to complain about with either of the photos. They just look great. So here we go with some video from the 4K cameras on the backside of the iPhone 16 Pro and the Google Pixel 9 Pro. We have 4K at 30 frames per second right now, as I mentioned, and I'm just curious to know what you think overall about the photo quality and the video quality between these two smartphones so far. Drop a comment below, let me know. So here we are with the ultra wide camera, where both of these phones are sporting a 48 megapixel sensor, and you can take full resolution photos on all these sensors in their respective pro modes, but by default they both spit out 12 megapixel ultra wide photos. Jumping into things, you can see here that under this bridge the iPhone definitely handled the highlights a lot better than the Pixel did, but then we have the Pixel swooping in and keeping things very under control, especially like at the top of this pole right here where the highlights are just very well managed. The colors are very similar between the two. I really don't think that there's a huge noticeable difference there, though like always the iPhone has its own style with that contrast just dialed up a little more than the Pixel. There's definitely more detail preserved in the darker areas of the shots when it comes to the Pixel 9 Pro, and I really do appreciate that. But overall, I do like the look of the iPhone when it comes to the ultra wide. All right, so here we go with a little bit of a stabilization test between these two, just to see how the video kind of stabilizes. We're shooting in 4K again off the main rear camera, and we're gonna pick up the pace just a little bit just to see how it takes with some running. And let me know what you think in the comments. Next up, we have some macro photos between these two off of the 48 megapixel sensors, which spits out 12 megapixel macro photos. And the Pixel definitely tends to lead towards the cooler tones, in my opinion, at least comparing these macro photos side by side right now, looking at them, though I do think that the iPhone catches focus a little better in certain areas, and I think that the details are a little sharper on the iPhones, especially in this cactus right here. You can see those little prickly things just sticking out there, and the detail on the metal screw here at the top. And then one of my favorites here is this lock right here. It just looks so gritty. Next up, we're stepping into some 12 megapixel 2x portrait mode shots from these two, and I think that they both did pretty well, though the Pixel did miss my glasses on this shot here. And coming up next, I think the iPhone, the shadows are just toast here. Like, I prefer the Pixel 100%, but overall the Pixel just produced better looking portrait photos in my opinion. The Pixel 9 Pro does have a 42 megapixel selfie camera, but it really doesn't make a huge difference when you compare it to Apple's 12 megapixel selfie camera, at least in the comparison shots that I took. And with portrait mode on the selfie, I think everything works great there too, but again, we just see the iPhone having just a little bit more of a contrasted look. With 5x telephoto shots, the Pixel is noticeably sharper than the iPhone, and that's definitely because the Pixel has a 48 megapixel telephoto sensor, whereas the iPhone just has 12 megapixels there. So the details are a little more crisp when it comes to the Pixel 9 Pro. Now that difference in detail is even more jarring when we jump up to a 25 times digital zoom on the iPhone 16 Pro and a 30 times digital zoom on the Pixel 9 Pro. There's just a lot more detail happening in these telephoto shots, even zoomed in all the way to the maximum digital zoom. And of course, we can't forget to look at the full resolution photos on these phones. We have 48 megapixels on the iPhone 16 Pro and 50 megapixels on the Pixel 9 Pro. And if you want to pixel peep at these a little bit, I personally think that the iPhone 16 Pro just has a little edge on sharpness when compared to the Pixel 9 Pro, but I would love to know your thoughts between the two, though I will say that the exposure seems to be a little more on point when it comes to the Pixel 9 Pro, so it really could be anybody's game. Another thing to consider is when it comes to slow motion video. On the iPhone 16 Pro, we can shoot 4K at 120 frames per second, whereas on the Pixel 9 Pro, we have 1080p video at 240 frames per second. So pick what you want. Do you want resolution or frame rate? Moving indoors for some low light on the main cameras, I really did like what the Pixel was doing with the exposure, but I could not for the life of me get the white balance or the colors to look right on the Pixel 9 Pro while indoors. I tried to take this Iron Man photo several times and the white balance on the Pixel just wasn't having it at all. All the colors are super oversaturated and they just don't look right. They don't look true to life. I know the iPhone looks a little duller in comparison when they're side by side here, but trust me, the iPhone was definitely more true to the actual situation. But as always, I would love to know what you think about the indoor shots here. All right, now here we go with some really low light footage from the front facing cameras, 4K 30 frames per second, and you can see kind of the difference between the iPhone 16 Pro and the Google Pixel 9 Pro, and how this low light is performing here. I don't know, let me know which one you prefer down in the comment section. When it comes to like complete night photography, I think that the Pixel does a better job when it comes to managing the exposure and not crushing the shadows like the iPhone does, though the colors are just way off on the Pixel. Like, it's kind of unforgivably off, at least for me personally, though your opinion may differ. Though I would say that overall, the Pixel just does a really good job making sure that the highlights are exposed properly and that there's detail in the shadows, especially here where the light is just blowing out the letters on the building from the iPhone side of things. It's really kind of a choice that I wish I didn't have to make between having proper exposure and having proper colors. I wish I could just have both of those things. And just in case your eyeballs were interested, here is the rear-facing main camera. We are again at 4K 30 frames per second on the iPhone 16 Pro and the Google Pixel 9 Pro, so love to hear your thoughts about all this. Winding down with some 4K video off the rear cameras from these two smartphones, I think that it could go either way, and it really depends on what you want in terms of an overall camera package. I'm talking about everything from daylight to nighttime to the macro photography to the video performance. I mean, you're getting the whole package with both of these smartphones, but there are trade-offs when it comes to picking the iPhone over picking the Pixel or vice versa. And really, it's going to come down to what features you're using the most on your smartphone. And take everything that I've said in consideration, and I would love to know what you think about all of this and more down in the comments section. Thank you so much.